Does God exist? According to Thomas Aquinas. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's, once again, the first question we're asking our newest and final philosopher of the season. Before anything, however, let's go over an incredibly brief background of Thomas Aquinas' life and journey toward becoming one of the most influential thinkers of his time. St. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 and lived until 1274. He was taught at the University of Naples, and it was during this time that he joined the Dominican monastic order, shocking his family to the point of them kidnapping and holding him against his will for an entire year before leaving him to his own wishes. He was influenced by the classical Greek thinkers and revered Aristotle so much that when referring to him in his writings, simply calls him the philosopher. He brought Aristotle's ideas to Christian Western Europe, and with them, a newfound respect for ancient philosophy and its vanguards. As for tonight's talk, Aquinas dedicates several of his chapters towards the existence of God. And while there are some vital phrases, such as, the attempt to prove that God exists would perhaps seem superfluous to some, namely those who assert that it is self-evident that God exists, so much so that the contrary cannot be thought. We will instead look at how God exists because we ourselves exist, as well as a few attributes of God. So let's jump right into it with our first passage of the night. In all ordered, efficient causes, the first is the cause of the intermediate, and the intermediate the cause of the last, whether there be one or many intermediates. The cause being removed, that of which it is the cause is removed. But if in efficient causes there is an infinite regress, none of the causes will be first. Therefore, all the others are removed, since they are intermediates. But this is manifestly false. Therefore, we must recognize that there is a first efficient cause, that is God. Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 1, Chapter 13. This is precisely the same logic, and indeed the same metaphor we've used in our falling dominoes example. Aquinas is arguing that if the first domino is removed, then all of the other dominoes must be removed too, or at the very least, understood that they stay in a stationary position permanently, as there is nothing to initiate that first fall, or that first cause. Nothing else is moved, and there is no chain of events. This can be translated in tangible terms as there never existing a Big Bang, which led to planet Earth, which never led to life, which never led to civilizations, which never led to technology, which never led to us connecting over this podcast during this very instance in time. This, as Aquinas puts it, is manifestly false. Therefore, there must be some type of initial action, initial push, leading to the fall of the very first domino. This cause, according to the philosopher, is God himself. To put it in simpler terms, the fact that there is any existence whatsoever must surely mean that there exists something otherworldly which indeed created our own world. Passage number 2. We have shown above that there is one first being possessing the full perfection of existence, whom we call God, and who, from the abundance of his perfection, grants being to all existing things. Thus, not only is he the first of beings, but the principle of all others. He grants existence to other things, not out of any necessity of nature, but of his free will, as is clear from the foregoing. The result is that he is the Lord of all things he has made, for he rules over what is subject to his will. He has perfect dominion over the things produced by him, since in producing them, he requires no external agent nor foundation of matter, since he is the cause of universal being. Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 3, Chapter 1. Firstly, Aquinas shows that God has an abundance of perfection, which he uses in granting being to all existing things. This further highlights the Bible's claim that humankind was made in God's image. I don't believe we should only consider this in physical terms, but emotional and semi-spiritual as well. As though we're not perfected in our spirits as God is, our souls crave to be nevertheless. How this helps prove the Bible is because God not only grants being, but takes the same energy he himself has and uses it to create us. This point is further proved when Aquinas states that God requires no external agent nor foundation of matter. God is made of such perfected substance that he uses that very essence to create matter itself, thereby creating us and indeed our very world. Secondly, Aquinas clearly states that he is the Lord of all things, and that he rules over what is subject to his will. This implies that there is nothing above God. There is no unmoved mover beyond him, as he is the unmoved mover himself, to take it back to the dominoes example. Everything came from that first falling piece, and we can be sure that it was the hand of God himself which put it into play. Passage number 3. Is God simple? It seems that he is not. From one simple thing, only one thing comes. For a thing causes something the same as itself, according to the philosopher. But a multitude of things proceeds from God. Therefore, he is not simple. On the divine simplicity, question 7, article 1. This takes our previous point and goes one step further with its reasoning. Aquinas states that because so many things have been, are, and always will be created by God, there must surely be a swirl of complexity and convolution in regards to God's spiritual composition. I disagree, however, simply based on the fact that if God is the sole personification of perfection itself, that would allow him to create of his own free will whatever it was that he willed to create. Taking it back to Plato's forms, God is the ultimate of all universals. Every particular, therefore, stems from his original position of perfection. No matter how vast the differences are in terms of the seas and beaches, the people and planets, it all comes from that divine source of initial perfection. Another reason why I'd say that God isn't as multifaceted as Aquinas thinks is that while he is infinitely more advanced than we could ever hope to comprehend, he is not mysterious with his purpose, which is love itself. His will may be mysterious, his ways may be mysterious, but he is not. To say that we serve a mysterious God would cast a shadow upon his glorious light, and that most surely cannot be. But to not get too far off track, this quote, at the end of the day, reaffirms Aquinas' ultimate belief in God himself, and that while maybe he is not simple in Aquinas' terms, he is all-powerful, and everything which is comes from him indeed. Thus, God does exist and is the very source of life and all other existence as well. So that sums up tonight's talk. I'm excited to read more of Aquinas' writings and see where we can all differ on opinions and perhaps agree on some as well. Finding middle ground is always a fascinating thing when taking into account the amount of time separating us from the philosophers we study. With that, I'll begin wrapping this up and just say thank you again to anyone who's still out there and listening. We have just a handful of questions left before saying goodbye for a little bit while we prepare for our third season. Until tomorrow, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. Fate or free will, according to Thomas Aquinas. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's the second question in our regular series of inquiries, which we're posing the medieval thinker tonight. As we've seen with the other philosophers of the season, it's not always so clear as to which dictates our very journeys. Are we driven by the fatalistic chains of fate itself? Or are we given the incredible gift of free will to choose as we see fit? Let's take a look at what Aquinas has to say about it, as we won't waste any time and get right into our first quote. Does a man have free choice in his actions, or does he choose necessarily? It seems that he chooses necessarily, not freely. For it is said in Jeremiah 10:23 that the way of a man is not his, neither is it in a man to walk and direct his steps. But that with respect to which a man has freedom is his, as constituted, as it were, within his dominion. Therefore, it seems that a man does not have free choice of his way or of his acts. On human choice, disputed question on evil, 6.1. Aquinas sets off on his attempt to prove that we are in fact governed by fate with this important piece of reasoning. The verse from the prophet Jeremiah speaks on the fact that men don't control their ultimate destinies. The New Living Translation says it as, I know, Lord, that our lives are not our own. We are not able to plan our own course. From this, we can gather a couple of things. Firstly, it does not negate free will entirely. For Proverbs 16:9 teaches that a man's heart plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. These two verses are compatible because while Jeremiah speaks on the fact that our lives indeed do belong to the one who created them in the first place, and that we are not able to plan our own course in terms of knowing what's best for us. Proverbs speaks on how we wish we could plan our own course as far as our hearts are concerned, but ultimately it's the Lord himself which in fact determines our steps toward his perfected destiny for us. Secondly, and following from the previous point, this can be seen as a larger idea. While God himself has picked out the frame for our individual lives, as in the dimensions, the material, and so forth, it's still up to us in regards to which way we'll actually paint the canvas. So then, we can reaffirm both Jeremiah and Proverbs as saying, while we wish we could pick out every part of our painting, God has already chosen the subject. We need only paint it in our unique individual styles from our unique individual perspectives. This is all to say simply that we can see where one would disagree with Aquinas as to why we don't in fact have free will. While Jeremiah does say our lives are not our own, he does not say that neither are our actions. It's from this line of reasoning which we can deviate away from Aquinas' proposition. Passage number 2. Moreover, he who does what he does not wish to do does not have free choice. But man does what he does not will. Romans 8:16. The evil that I hate, I do. Therefore, a man does not have free choice in his actions. On human choice, disputed question on evil, 6.22. This is as straightforward an answer as we can get. From what I've discovered so far, Aquinas is a very mathematical logician, as perhaps all students of logic are. But this is important here because it highlights his train of thought as to why we indeed lack the free will in regards to our day-to-day actions. His premise, aside from using the verse in Romans, is that man does what he does not will. This can be seen when anyone is overtaken by their human, sinful nature and compromises their righteousness for short-term satisfaction. It's that scenario which Aquinas comes to his conclusion that we do what we do not want to do. But I disagree of inferring that just because we compromise some of the time means that we don't have free will all of the time. I've previously stated my belief in free will and could even argue that in our moments of weakness, we may very well give into the sin of our own willful choosing. Of course, we hate the sin and the evil, as Paul puts it in Romans. But it seems that the realization of such feelings only come after the sin is committed and its spiritual consequences take hold of our hearts once more, waking us back up to reality. Simply put, the moments of weakness which come from time to time when living a human life do not discount the many others when we, in fact, do what we want to do and beautiful things occur. So then, is it fate which drives us to our actions or free will? According to Aquinas, it's very much fate which controls our destinies. We've spoken a bit about compatibilism before, and we'll speak about it in length again in future talks. But for now, we can see where Aquinas' theories fit into the larger scale of something which hold both fate and free will to be true concepts of life. And with that, I'll begin wrapping this episode up as we prepare for the final 3 questions and the answers which Aquinas himself reasoned out. We'll pick it back up tomorrow with the inquiry of why evil exists and see what the philosopher has to say about it. Until then, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. Why does evil exist? According to Thomas Aquinas. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's the next inquiry we're making to our final medieval philosopher. As we've previously seen, other thinkers attribute the existence of evil to things ranging from a complete lack of good, to a lost connection with God, to even showing the goodness and grace of God by forgiving all that which is evil in the first place. Tonight, we're going to see what Aquinas has to say about the existence, and indeed the very problem of evil. So let's not waste any time and get right into our first passage. Is an action good or evil because of its end? It seems not. The goodness of an act is something existing in it, but the end is an extrinsic cause. Therefore, action is not called good or evil because of the end. Moreover, it can happen that a good activity is ordered to a bad end, as when someone gives alms in order to be praised. And conversely, a bad activity can be ordered to a good end, as when someone steals in order to give to the poor. Therefore, the action is not good or evil because of the end. Summa Theology, Question 18, Article 4. The inclusion of this passage is due to its commentary on the difference between good and evil on the whole. Aquinas argues that it does not depend on whether the end is good or bad. The action itself is what matters. I tend to agree, as the end result can differ depending on whose point of view we're looking through, or which side of the situation we may fall on. What ultimately matters is the act itself, independent of its possible outcome. Another point to be considered is why different actions spur different end results in the first place. Why is it that a singular act can have both good or bad ends, depending upon which vantage point we have? Such as the person stealing to give to the poor. If it's us that the person is stealing from, we consider it a bad action. If we're the poor which is given the gift, we may consider it a good action. Whichever we ultimately decide, it must come down to the intended cause of the action. What intention is it carried out with? If it's to do evil, then it can indeed be called an evil action. If it's to do good, then it can indeed be called a good action. Passage number 2. Are moral acts specified by being good or evil? It seems that they are not. Good and evil are found in acts conformably with things, as has been said. But things are not specified by good and evil. For good and bad men are in the same species. Therefore, neither should the good and evil in acts make them specifically different. Moreover, since evil is a privation, it is a kind of non-being. But non-being cannot be a difference, according to the philosopher in Metaphysics 2.3. Therefore, since the difference constitutes the species, it seems that an act is not constituted in some species from the fact that it is evil. So good and evil do not make human acts specifically different. Summa Theology, question 18, article 5. Here, Aquinas seems to be backtracking a bit in terms of just that, the terms themselves. I may be completely wrong in my assumption, but it seems that what he differentiated in the previous point between good and bad ends, he now seems to be employing both terms into one cause, which is human action itself. If there is no difference between good and evil acts, then how can one gauge what the intention of each act is? Aquinas does point out that evil is a privation, and to relate it back to St. Augustine's cause of evil, which is the complete privation of good, we can say that both philosophers see evil as a type of non-being, with regards to the being of good. This is a complex passage which I still have yet to fully understand, which seems to be a theme with me and much of Aquinas' writings. However, to look into it a bit deeper, if good and evil do not make human acts specifically different, then we can say that we're all indeed driven by fate itself, which falls directly in line with Aquinas' thoughts on the matter, as we've seen in our previous talk. If there are no good actions and bad actions, then it's simply a case of humankind operating on autopilot, forever pushed forward by the preceding event, and so there is no responsibility to be owned. So, why does evil exist? According to Thomas Aquinas, it's not so much why evil itself exists, as much as the overall actions of humankind, which may seem to us as individually good or bad. If evil does, however, have a root cause, it's, as he puts it, a privation. A privation indeed of all that is righteous, of all that is merciful, of all that is humankind itself at its best. We can, of course, spend a much greater amount of time unthreading Aquinas' logic and thoughts when talking about the existence of evil, as he's written much more about it than we can cover in any podcast episode. However, we'll concede that much of it is too in-depth for a 10-minute talk and would require much more analysis than we normally provide in these installments. So I'll begin wrapping things up now, and just again, thank each and every one of you who are still out there and listening. Even amidst all the chaos and turmoil of these present times, there is still hope. And for those of us who enjoy pondering these deeper questions, always remember that hope dies last. Until tomorrow, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. What is beauty? According to Thomas Aquinas. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. My name is Dre, and that's the penultimate question of the season as we delve into the ideas of Aquinas once more. We've come back around to talking about beauty again, and I'm glad that we're finally able to see what our philosopher of the moment has to say about it. So let's not waste any time and get right into it with our very first passage. The beautiful is the same as the good, and they differ in aspect only. For since good is what all seek, the notion of good is that which calms the desire, while the notion of the beautiful is that which calms the desire by being seen or known. Consequently, those senses chiefly regard the beautiful, which are the most cognitive, sight and hearing, as ministering to reason. For we speak of beautiful sights and beautiful sounds, but in reference to the other objects of the other senses, we do not use the expression beautiful, for we do not speak of beautiful tastes and beautiful odors. Thus, it is evident that beauty adds to goodness a relation to the cognitive faculty, so that good means that which simply pleases the appetite, while the beautiful is something pleasant to apprehend. Summa Theology, question 27, article 1. The beautiful is that which calms the desire by being seen or known. This is the bottom line to Aquinas' theory on beauty, as well as the beautiful is something pleasant to apprehend. Here, we can attribute that which is beautiful to things which our senses pick up on, specifically sight and hearing. For we can say that something looks beautiful or sounds beautiful, but before we can call something beautiful, our senses must first experience it as something which calms the desire, or something which is pleasant to apprehend. The difference between that which is simply good and that which is beautiful is that good things are those which are sought and found, but beautiful things take it one step further and are actually pleasant to take in, to experience, and to categorize as beautiful. Not all things are pleasant to apprehend, but when we are given the chance to enjoy a gorgeous sunset or a well-produced song, we can come to the conclusion that those things are, in fact, beautiful, as they are not only things which are sought out and found, but as we just mentioned, are a joy to perceive as well. Passage number 2. I answer that good is the cause of love, as being its object. But good is not the object of the appetite, except as apprehended. And therefore, love demands some apprehension of the good that is loved. For this reason, the philosopher, Ethics 9, 5.12, says that bodily sight is the beginning of sensitive love. And in like manner, the contemplation of spiritual beauty or goodness is the beginning of spiritual love. Accordingly, knowledge is the cause of love for the same reason as good is, which can be loved only if known. Summa Theology, question 27, article 2. Spiritual beauty or goodness is the beginning of spiritual love. Spiritual beauty is a deep concept which we could analyze for hours. But what we can assume that Aquinas is saying here is that spiritual beauty can also be said as spiritual clarity. The clearer something is, the more appreciation can be given to the beauty therein. We can relate this to Aquinas' previous point and say that spiritual beauty is all that which is pleasing to perceive. It's not only finding out answers to questions or seeking divine truths to worldly mysteries, but that warmness or peace one feels when in deep meditation or prayer. It's our spiritual center connecting with and communicating with God in all of His glory. It's the tranquility we feel when all of the world's static is drowned out and all we are left with is spiritual clarity. This, I think, is perhaps one way to describe spiritual beauty. Aquinas also states that knowledge, as is good, can be loved only if known. This makes sense, as one can't feel anything, much less feel love itself, towards something which they have no idea about in the first place. So, to take it back to our previous point, we can only love that which is spiritually clear, spiritually beautiful, or spiritual at all, if we know of it. This is the knowledge Aquinas may have been referring to. In other words, how can one feel a spiritual peace without first knowing of spirituality? And furthermore, without loving it as well. So, what is beauty? According to Thomas Aquinas, it is anything which is a pleasure to perceive. Not only is it something good, but it is something good which pleases the senses as well. So that's it for tonight's talk. I'll begin wrapping things up as we start preparing for tomorrow's final installment of the season. In it, we'll explore once more the flow of time and what Aquinas' thoughts are on the subject. I can't stress how grateful I am for having you as a listener, and for each time that you come along with me for another episode, I thank you. Until tomorrow, my prayers, like always, are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. How does time move? According to Thomas Aquinas. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's our final question, which we're asking our final philosopher of Season 2. I'm always amazed at what we discover about time as we delve into our different philosophers' beliefs and ideas. So let's not waste any time and get right into our first passage of the night. God knows all things, not only things actual, but also things possible to him and creature. And since some of these are future contingent to us, it follows that God knows future contingent things? Summa Theology, question 14, article 13. If God knows all things in the future, then it follows that the future already exists, somewhere down the line from our present perspectives. If the future already exists, then we can reaffirm that we indeed live in a block universe and that eternalism is true. If eternalism is true, then not only does God have full knowledge of our actions, independent of where we reside in relation to time, but that we have no control over changing them either. This perhaps follows Aquinas' thoughts on free will. And though he wrote objections to it in the defense of fate, he also wrote much in the defense of free will too. So he may have believed in both, as compatibilists do. I tend to lean toward the same theory. Compatibilism is something we've only begun talking about, and something which we'll definitely continue delving into in future seasons. For now, though, we can say that whether or not there is in fact free will, we can still be encouraged to use every moment which passes us by to the best of our abilities. Passage number 2. Now, God knows all contingent things, not only as they are in their causes, but also as each one of them is actually in itself. And although contingent things become actual successively, nevertheless, God knows contingent things not successively, as they are in their own being, as we do, but simultaneously. The reason is because his knowledge is measured by eternity, as is also his being. And eternity, being simultaneously whole, comprises all time. Hence, all things that are in time are present to God from eternity. Not only because he has the types of things present within him, as some say, but because his glance is carried from eternity over all things as they are in their presentiality. Hence, it is manifest that contingent things are infallibly known by God, inasmuch as they are subject to the divine sight in their presentiality. Yet they are future contingent things in relation to their own causes. Summa Theology, question 14, article 13. This follows directly from our previous point, just in a longer, deeper way. It's as if God is looking at our world from a point of view outside time and outside of our very realm. He's looking at this spinning ball of land and water and sees all of these things which have ever happened, are happening, and will ever happen at the same exact instance. Using this reasoning, we can reaffirm that all three tenses of time happen simultaneously, at least from God's own perspective. So, what's our final summation on the matter of time? It seems that, according to Aquinas, we live in a world where the past, present, and future all happen simultaneously. Or that's what one could attempt to argue given the material we've gone over tonight. I would tend to agree on some level of the theory, as I do believe that everything which will be always was, and everything which was always will be. And with that, we've reached the end of the season. I'm incredibly thankful that you've stuck it out with me through many of the same questions posed to vastly different thinkers. We've spanned more than a century of philosophers, each with their own individual thoughts and theories, schools and styles. We're extremely lucky to have been handed down so much material to study from, and I can only hope that these bite-sized episodes do the themes we cover some fraction of justice. I can promise you that everything we went over in this season will absolutely carry over to the next one, as season 3 is entirely centered upon the Renaissance and 6 of its most recognized minds. I'll save the names until the first episode, which will premiere after the new year. So as we all prepare for a much better year in 2021 than we had in 2020, let's take a moment and remember why we come back to these themes in the first place. To understand our world and indeed ourselves with that much more clarity. God created us to be inquisitive, to nurture our natural curiosity, and to never stop asking the deeper questions. He's ready when we are. So let's continue onward with this journey we've embarked on together with the highest hopes that one day it'll lead us to the enlightenment which so many have sought after in their own lives and which so few have actually found. Until 2021, my prayers, like always, are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care.